Hello everyone, I'm Nasia Kotsiou and I'm a third year PhD student at Hughes Hall. I'm interested in children's use of social media and how this impacts their thinking and learning. And I am really excited to be joined today by Professor Wegerif. Rupert is a professor of education at the University of Cambridge, and we are here to talk today about digital education futures. So Rupert, please tell us a little about yourself and your work.
Oh, thanks, Nasia. Thanks for giving me this opportunity to share what we're doing in the field of digital education. I've always been involved in education technology. I did a PhD, an awful long time ago now, in the early 90s, in fact, at the Open University. And it was a very exciting time for education technology. There were so many possibilities. A lot of people there, like Tim O'Shea and Diana Laurillard, we're working on intelligent tutoring systems, on the impact of artificial intelligence. I particularly focused on how technology can support dialogue and learning through dialogue. And I also had a strong interest in the theory of technology in education. I'm trying to write a book about that at the moment. But what's interesting is that over the years, having seen these tremendous possibilities that there were, and there really were possibilities, but of course difficult to implement, and many perhaps exaggerated utopian hopes. But what's surprising is so many years later, well, about 30 years later, how little has actually changed despite these possibilities. And I do think that's interesting. And so working together with other colleagues who are very much in the field, like Sarah Hennessy, who heads up as research director at Cambridge, the EdTech Hub, which is a heavily funded by the government to try and support educational change through technology in low-income countries, for example. I've been doing research with her and with Louis Major and others. I mentioned Sarah in particular as a key colleague at Hughes Hall in this field of digital education futures. We've decided that it would be a good idea to create a center here at Hughes Hall. The Digital Education Futures Initiative, we're calling it, but what we'd really like is an institute, because we feel that it's time that there was a forum for all the exciting work that's going on at Cambridge that could influence practice in the world by exploring these possibilities. So not just talking about them, but finding out in practice what the weaknesses are, what the positives are, so that practitioners and policymakers have the evidence that they need to make changes. So we are trying to turn our research expertise and interest into something that could have a greater impact in the world.
That is really exciting. Thanks, Rupert. And briefly, can you give your definition of digital education futures for our viewers?
Yes, I'm particularly interested in the future aspect, the future of education that's made possible by new information and communication technologies. Because our current education system obviously works very well in many respects, but a lot of people have argued that it's not always appropriate to the needs of the present, let alone of the future. I think in some ways education is the central discipline for dealing with the future. If you think about it, children coming into education now, age 5, they're going to be shaping the world in 2060 or 2070. And the world that they're going to be working and living in is going to be very different from now. And education is going to have a big impact on how that world's going to be, at least has that potential. So I really do think of education less as the discipline that focuses on transmitting knowledge from the past, important as that is, but also as the discipline where we design the future together. But of course, that future now, I think the technology is central, partly because it's always been central. A lot of what people think of as education is something to do with literacy, with numeracy, reading books. Nothing wrong with reading books, but if you go to Cambridge to study maths, they say you're reading maths, quite appropriately, because education is very bound up with that in a sense, legacy technology of print, of books, of pens, of bits of paper. Just look at the kind of exams, individual exams with pens and bits of paper, which is great, but alternatives are possible now that the communications technology has changed so radically. And I guess that's what we're interested in exploring. How could things be done differently? And would it work? Because we don't just want to leap into the future without knowing what we're getting into, just because we have great hopes of some sort of utopian transformation. Experience shows that sometimes these things don't work. Just because it seems like a good idea, it might not be wise for policymakers to change things too radically. In order to change, they're going to need evidence, they're going to need trials, they're going to need people like us basically doing design-based research, exploring these new models to find out what the problems are and find out how they can be made to work.
This is really fascinating.
Our idea for the centre, really, to work with practitioners and policymakers to offer a kind of service, a support.
Thanks, Rupert. It's really fascinating and very timely right now. And I was wondering, how do you see digital education futures fit with Hughes Hall?
All right, well, this is obviously a Hughes Hall centre that I'm talking about. We're calling it the Digital Education Futures Initiative, and in a way it's an initiative to create an institute. We have some support at the moment from ARM, which is, makes chips and is very influential in the field, and also from Epic Games, and we're talking to a number of other bodies. But we would love to create an institute that could serve as a forum for all the exciting research going on at Cambridge, not only in the Faculty of Education, but in Raspberry Pi, for example, which is an amazingly innovative body, in the Faculty of Computing, in manufacturing. There's an amazing where Thomas Bonet has a cyber lab looking at virtual reality. It's extraordinary how much innovative work is going on around the place, including, of course, Cambridge Assessment and Cambridge University Press. Now, joined together, we're working with the Cambridge Partnerships for Education, which have a big impact on school systems. You're saying, well, what's that got to do with Hughes Hall? I'm mentioning all those interdisciplinary groups because the college traditionally is the place where interdisciplinary innovations happen, where people talk together over dinner and glasses of wine. It's very nice and comfortable, but it really works. I think Cambridge has this fantastic tradition of innovation and indeed Nobel Prize winning research, which I think is related to the interdisciplinary conversations that go on in colleges. So one of the reasons why a college is the best place and Hughes Hall is the best place. Hughes Hall, incidentally, was founded as a teacher training college. It has a long tradition of connections with educational research and educational innovation. So there's that interdisciplinary element. There's also, of course, we're fitting in with this exciting bridge project, which is the idea Hughes Hall has under the leadership of Anthony Freeling, the current president, had this idea of, I think you could say, reinventing the college for the 21st century. The role of the college is helping to provide real-world connections for the fellows and particularly the students. So we have not only academics in the college, but we have bridge fellows who represent industry and policymakers. And so the idea is that we could work together to serve as a bridge. So, it's part of a bridge project to turn academic research into research that has real world impact. And part of that, of course, is offering opportunities for students. I don't know, what do you think about that, Nasia? Have you got a view?
I completely agree. Thank you very much, Rupert. So as a Hughes Hall student, I am honestly super excited to be involved with digital education futures activities and projects. And I would particularly love the opportunity to work with partners in industry, policy, and practice in order to contribute, as you said, in bridging the gap between academia and practice. And from a personal point of view, that will also help me with broadening my professional network and collaborate with people bringing expertise from the policy and commercial world. And this is one of the unique opportunities that I would not be able to have if it were not for digital education futures.
Oh, that's great. Well, we're hoping we'll create an innovation lab with a number of PhD students like yourself who are doing excellent and important research in the field, if we get the right sort of funding in a way to explore new issues. For instance, Epic Games have asked us to explore the impact of the kind of collaborative learning that occurs in online games, and to see if some of the if some of the shifts in disposition can be assessed effectively. So we're hoping to use that kind of support to create a lab with opportunities for PhD students at Hughes, and possibly to bring in others as well. So that is certainly the plan.
That's exciting, and I really look forward to it. And now we focus on the current situation where COVID-19 has made big changes in our lives. In your opinion, what is the general impact of COVID on digital education futures?
Mm. Well, my first response is that I found it very exciting, but then, of course, I feel a bit guilty about that because it's also been terrible for so many people. And of course, that is awful. But from an ed tech point of view, I think it has shown a lot of people what the possibilities are. As I mentioned, back in the 90s, we were very aware of these possibilities. A lot of people, especially at the Open University and elsewhere, were researching them and writing about them, but nothing very much has happened. It's surprising how little impact technology has had on education. And I don't think people were quite aware of what was possible. But now, because of the crisis, people have been forced, for example, to put their teaching online in schools and colleges and universities. And the moment you do that, you're faced with a lot of issues, and you realize the need for research. So, for example, do you just transfer your face-to-face lectures online? But then what's the role of asynchronous learning, of text-based chats, of dialogues that are mediated through blogs that take place over a period of time? What's the role of media like YouTube and TikTok? And of course, the moment you've got your teaching online, it kind of raises the question, well, is it best to have local teachers doing the lectures, or couldn't we perhaps bring in TED Talks, or go to, say, someone like Khan Academy, where they have very excellent maths teachers producing different bits of maths? Does the teacher actually need to be located in the same town or village, or maybe they could be beaming in from Alaska or Sri Lanka or Fiji? I was talking to someone from Fiji the other day. I had no idea. I thought I was talking to someone in London. It kind of opens up a space of possibilities, and that really only raises the question of how education could be done differently, and therefore the need for research into these possibilities to see if they really do work, because it's easy to have good ideas, and to see what the downside is, to explore the impact of them. And also perhaps to explore the impact that this might have on our understanding of what education is.
That is really interesting. Thanks, Rupert. And building on what you said, what education could be, I'm wondering, in your view, what are some exciting future models of digital education?
Hmm. Well, thanks for asking. There's so many, and that's why I'm very excited about this initiative. Um, I don't know where to start. Well, one of the fairly practical things that we know we can do, and that is being done elsewhere, is a global platform for teacher research exchange. This is an initiative being taken forward by Hughes Fellows Pete Dudley, who had a lot of experience running education in Camden until recently and has now joined us. And Sarah Hennessy, as I said, is heading up certainly the Cambridge research on the EdTech hub area. And they've got this exciting idea, which is partly inspired by work going on in Japan, where teachers can research their own practice and then share that research with other teachers in a way which is, as I say, not only testing, does it work, but how can we make it work? In other words, under what conditions do these things work, and what are the limitations, what are the weaknesses, what are the mechanisms involved? And so that they could explore, say, governments or indeed commercial interests want to try out different ideas. They could explore if they work, how they work, but they could also generate their own explorations into the curriculum and shared research together. So, but that's all about the pedagogy in a way, but it's made possible by the internet, by having an online mediated community of practice. And there are a number of, I find those those sort of possibilities are quite exciting. One of the inspirations, in a way, is the initiative by MIT, Scratch, which created an online mediated community for young people creating software programs together and sharing them in this new programming language. It's now being used by many schools to help teach programming, but it's not essentially a school-based program. It's a peer-to-peer learning. They generate resources, they share them, they discuss them together. And of course, there are also teaching programs now incorporated into that, but it's mainly about peer-to-peer learning. And that's got 30 million users now. So a university inspired design-based research project, creating design-based research just means learning by doing, trying it out, seeing what works, iteratively improving it, and at the same time exploring the impact that different choices make in order to understand, if you like, the teaching and learning mechanisms, what links the environments and the teaching to the learning. So we want to do, inspired by Scratch, we want to do projects like that. One that I've been involved in already that we want to take further is about virtual internships. So these aren't real internships. These are like simulated role play experiences where we have now been working with British Telecom and Huawei. So we have leading people coming into the schools via video and saying, these are the challenges now. We want you to work together to come up with solutions or to come up with new products. Then the young people, and we're working with children aged 12 and 13 on this, they work together in small teams, they come up with solutions, and they also get input from real engineers, but via video. So it's all a kind of simulation. What's exciting about that is we're working with schools in opportunity areas where work experience is very difficult for them. And and this way they're having a contact, which it feels like a real work experience contact with engineers and leaders in cutting edge companies, global companies. So we'd like to scale up that model. We think it could work around the world. And these are just two. There are so many examples of work. Some of the work on artificial intelligence now and how it can accelerate learning is very exciting, but clearly needs research. As I think I might have mentioned Thomas Boyne in manufacturing here doing all this virtual reality. I think there's tremendous potential there. And I'd like to get into things like telepathic interfaces, because of course we take so much in education for granted. And I'm not saying, I'm sure that learning to read and write is going to be very centrally important to education for many years, but digital literacy is also possibly quite important. Learning how to learn with others through asking questions, through dialogue, and the fact that interfaces are changing so radically is kind of relevant, and we ought to explore the potential of the future that might in some ways go beyond the emphasis on reading and writing, which at the end of the day are just interfaces, aren't they? Anyway, these are just thoughts, and it'd be exciting to explore the potential for transforming education in the short, medium, and long-term future.
That's really fascinating. And finally, in your opinion, what are the biggest challenges of digital education? And how can digital education futures help in overcoming these challenges?
Well, there are so many challenges. Often when I mention this field of technology, especially when I start getting carried away by the potential of things like virtual reality, the digital divide in access is what first comes up. And that is very important. And we're hoping to try and address it. I say that with a little caution because sometimes I feel as if people are a little bit naive as to the extent to which the current education system is incredibly unequal. People born in Finland seem to have access to a very effective education system with really good resources, but people born in many other countries don't have that access. And we all know how inequitable, even in a country like the UK, the postcode lottery is in terms of education and, of course, your parental background and so on. So I actually think that exploring these global platforms that I've been talking about is about exploring ways in which we can make education more inclusive, in which we can offer high quality education to far more people. And there's always been, I remember when I was at the OU, as I say, I was there as a PhD student and researcher for many years. And of course we had a social mission and there was a lot of concern about equity. And every year people would say things like, yeah, but we shouldn't be using video recorders because people don't have videos. And it struck me how the evidence showed that the technology changed really rapidly. And the adoption was incredibly fast because the prices went down much faster than anyone anticipated. I read the other day that in sub-Saharan Africa, 80% of people now have mobile phones. And we have a project, we've got another PhD student, Kevin Martin, who you probably know, of course, working in Kenya, very effective mobile phone-based peer-to-peer education, where people are producing materials, local farmers in particular, about different agricultural approaches as well as other things. And this is really popular and effective. So we think these new digital techniques, working, as I say, with Sarah Hennessy and the EdTech Hub, have a potential to create greater access and to overcome the digital divide in many ways. I already mentioned how the virtual internship project could offer access to work experience for children in schools who don't normally have that access, who aren't in regions where they have neighboring high-tech companies they could work with. So there's so many ways in which we could address that. But that's just one challenge, the digital divide. And of course, it's not just a challenge about technology. Those technical issues are being solved very rapidly in lots of exciting ways. I'm particularly interested in Elon Musk's Starlink, which is a satellite-based way of getting broadband almost everywhere. So I think we can solve the technical problems. As I mentioned, I think I have a strong interest in educational dialogue. And I think that's one way of solving the pedagogical problem of access. It's one thing to have access to all these open educational resources on the web, and I think that's incredibly valuable and powerful. But we also need to prepare young people to be able to use them, to be able to network, to learn from others, to ask questions. So that's also got to be a focus of what we're doing, to look at the social side as well as the technical side and address that. I'm going on too much about one challenge. There's so many challenges. Another challenge which I'm very aware of is I think there's the danger that if we're working with companies like Epic Games that I mentioned and others, that there might be, in a sense, a slanting of the research so that we become naively sucked into serving other people's agendas. And of course, not just commercial companies, also big government bodies or even our own colleagues at Cambridge Assessment who might have a stake in the existing system. For example, a stake in a high stakes assessment in these big exams and so on. And of course, it's not that that's wrong, but I think we have to be very careful that our agenda isn't shaped too much by those who support us and fund us. And I guess the best way in which DEFI can address that, I've mentioned how we can try and address the digital divide through our design-based research projects. But I was thinking about it, the best way we can address this challenge that we get sucked into serving commercial and other interests is through having a plurality of voices, through inviting in to our procedures the voices of, well, critical sociologists, for example, like Susan Robertson, the head of the faculty, and Mark Carrigan, who's working on that at the moment. And people who are very aware of the political situation. So the point of being interdisciplinary is to have a plurality of voices involved in the projects and in the design so that we're fully aware of what we're doing. We have our eyes wide open and we don't get unconsciously sucked into serving agendas that might be of value to big companies or other corporations, but might not ultimately be in the best interests of human flourishing, which is probably what we're trying to aim at. And I guess our biggest challenge, just to continue with these challenges, is the challenge of social change. As I mentioned, it's quite extraordinary how resistant the current education system has been to the potentials of new technology. And that's because it works very well within its own parameters. But so social change is very hard, and it's understandably hard because policymakers are risk averse and practitioners are often quite risk averse for good reasons, because there's plenty of evidence where people have leapt into making big decisions based on the perhaps utopian visions of techno gurus, and it hasn't worked out. So in order to be able to have an impact, a positive impact on world education, we need to have a model of social change and I think a key there is being able to provide policymakers and practitioners with the evidence that they need. One of the ways that I see this research is a kind of participatory design research, where we get a lot of people involved in, if you like, the design workshops, in understanding what they need, and then working together to iteratively implement new models and explore, well, what's positive, but also what's negative? What are the unexpected impacts? So that at the end of the day, people have all the evidence and all the research explorations that they're going to need in order to understand what decisions they could make and how they could make it. So I think, in a way, how we organize social change is the biggest challenge of DEFI, because that's what we're aiming at. We want to have an institute that will have a world-changing impact, obviously as a hub amongst others. And that socio-technical change is extremely challenging, and we'll be working on how to achieve that. Of course, the interdisciplinary basis of Hughes Hall is very helpful for that, because we're working now with Professor Paul Tracy in the Judge Business School, who has a center for social enterprise. And we have support from people who know a lot about the legal situation and the political situation. So I think our interdisciplinary design workshop approach to change is something that we hope will be able to solve that challenge. But that is perhaps our biggest challenge. Change is hard.
That was really insightful. Thank you, Rupert. We all very much look forward to seeing DEFI's work. Thanks
very much, Nasia. Yes. Well, we're organizing, we're hoping to have a high-profile launch event in January. We've created a few videos of interviews with key people in the field, which will be starting to launch soon. So watch this space, and hopefully exciting things will start happening and keep happening until the world is changed and becomes a better place. Well, at least we'll try.
Thank you very much, and thank you for listening. Bye, everyone.
Bye.